That's what I wanted.
Right.
You know?
When you got wounded, did it change any of that mentality that you had, or did you want to get back to the fight? Did you miss the fight? How did you feel differently after you got
I
wounded?
didn't change until probably the last 3 years. I can honestly say, if there's anything that's surprised me, it's that, you know, 10 years after being out, you're like, well, surely it is what it is at this point. I'm not going to change my mentality. And just in the last 2 to 3 years, I see things absolutely completely different. Absolutely completely different. And it's, and now I see where like a lot of older veterans get. I get it. And it's kind of, it's not kind of, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking because it doesn't matter what you say, like you can't explain it. But one day they'll get there on their own, and then they too will want to explain it to the younger version of themselves, but they can't. And it's just like watching all these people that you just you know what's going to happen, you know their future, but you can't.
What flipped that switch for you 2 or 3 years
Man,
ago?
I don't know. I've thought about that. I've tried to. I don't know. It's awareness of just the overall, and I don't mean this in any, you know, conspiratorial sense, but like the overall system, just the way that human beings have always been over time. It's just the way we are. It's a cycle. And what's interesting about that cycle is, you know, the warrior cycle. It's not new, you know. It's been this way for thousands of years. And one thing that I think, I don't know if I said this in the documentary, but again, I'll still use the word or the term PTSD, even though I think it's more complicated than that. But, you know, back, we'll say Braveheart, great movie. Braveheart times, okay? Braveheart times, you know, we're running at each other and hitting each other with axes, you know, and we're this close together. That's pretty hardcore combat, right? Well, yeah, but also a freaking bomb dropping and blowing up all of us that we didn't even know the fucking airplane was up there.
Right.
And then now we're in pieces. Is that any more or less ruthless? It's about the same.
Yeah.
The difference is now we live a pretty good life, not in war. But back in Braveheart times, even if you weren't in combat, life was fucking hard.
Right. Every time you wanted to eat, you were doing that.
Yeah. I mean, kids died, you know, in childbirth, very common. Your brother dies from dysentery, literally shits to death.
Right.
Common. Right. So back then, life was this hard. Combat was this hard. Now, combat's still the same, but life is so much easier. And that difference,
that chasm, that just must be fucking, and that must have been so insane to come back to and see.
It's like you're jumping between two realities.
Right.
And that difference to me is PTSD, because you've seen this other reality that you know exists. And then you come back to a place that no one else has seen it. It's like an imaginary world. You're like, no, I'm telling you, like, some people are capable of this. And people are like, no, people aren't capable. But again, they wouldn't know until they've seen it. And another thing that you realize in combat is, I don't care who you are. Everyone has murder in them. Everyone. Absolutely everyone. And people are like, well. The reason we do, and again, there's exceptions to every rule, don't get me wrong, but of course we do. We're designed that way. We're designed, it's literally a survival mechanism. If, you know, 200 years ago, it's, you know, me and you hand to hand, like, yeah.
Can you give me an example of something that shocked the shit out of you, where that, like of that example of somebody that you wouldn't think they had it in them, or?
You know, I saw people's level of ruthlessness on, you know, some of those people that are just such, you know, the most innocent, nice guy. And then you just see them being absolutely ruthlessly violent. And it's surprising, you know, but what's worse is again, I'm not that way by nature. And I remember in the beginning, I was like, well, that's fucking unnecessary. Well, I don't really agree with that. I think you should do the minimum amount to get things done, the minimum amount of violence to get things done. And that's how I felt for the first couple of years. Then I realized, and these people, by the way, that I'm talking about were at that time had done more trips, were more experienced than me. And then I realized over time, no, when it comes to, so I have this thing called the violence scale, which is totally arbitrary. I made it up, but the violence scale is a 1 through 10 scale. And, for me back then, it was like, start with 1, and if 1 doesn't work, you go to 2, and if 2 doesn't work, you go to 3, and then once it works, then you stop. And what I eventually learned is that every number in between 0 and 10 is risk that you're taking on to go through those numbers. For me to truly have no risk, I come in at a 0. As soon as I know it's going to be violent and that switch is flipped, I go to 10. Because the reason is, if they go to a higher number before I do, I'm dead. They win, I lose. So you learn over time, you have to be absolutely when it comes to violence and it comes to that game, everything in between, 1 and 9 is just you opening yourself up to lose. And it goes like fighting, and I'm not talking about boxing, or like real fighting. I always say, and look, I'm not a martial artist, but I always say, the first rule of fighting, same thing as the first rule of gunfighting, same thing as the first rule of war: cheat. There's no honor in death. The freaking first, there's no rules. No one, it's war. Fuck you. Like, that's the reality of it. And it's a horrible reality. And the problem is that we're at a point where we can't do war that way for many reasons. So there's this ambiguity in this. It's just, we're doing war with rules, which doesn't make any sense. It would blow people's minds how much risk we take as soldiers, or airmen, Navy, whatever, Marines, to when we know we shouldn't, because of politics, essentially.
Puts a lot of pressure on very young people, though, to be able to accurately gauge when a 1 is even going to become a 2, right? And talk about that challenge a little bit, because I imagine as you got more experienced, that was probably an easier call to make. But for an 18-year-old out there for the first time, if you're looking at it as a 1 or a 10, you actually got to be really good at figuring out when it's a 2. And my guess is when you're not that experienced, that's a pretty damn hard call to make.
It is, and people can't grasp how much training it takes to go into a room and there's a good guy and a bad guy, and only shoot the bad guy. I mean, it's not only an unbelievable amount of training, it's an unbelievable amount of time. And on top of all that, you learn through the training process, it's also something in your head. Some people can do it, some people can't.
And you don't really know till you're there, right?
No,
I mean, you can train your ass out and talk about that. I mean, so you went through some of the most extensive training possible. How prepared were you? How different is it when you actually get into the real thing?
It's like you're saying, which is, you don't really, the selection process that we had, and I'll not go into it, but I'll say this because it's unofficial. This is what I think it is because what it is, what you're doing, you're like, what the fuck does this have to do with fighting wars? Like, this doesn't make any sense, and now I look back and I go, God, it's so smart.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And again, not official. This is what I think it is. What I think it is it's designed to find people that can get instructions once and figure it out. If they make a mistake, they self-correct. They don't go down the rabbit hole of, they just self-correct, because it's all by yourself. You're alone almost the whole time. And the other thing is they learn very quickly, and they learn very quickly from their mistakes. That's what I think it's designed for, because once you have that, you can teach them anything.
I want to ask you something else about. I mean, I guess so much shit I want to ask you, man. But I want to ask you something else about that chasm.
Yeah.
When you think about these things, like what you're talking about the parallel between Braveheart times and war and life, and like how now it's like everything in our life, literally everything is
So
like,
easy.
One thing they talk about is just transportation. Just like literally in World War II would have taken few weeks of just
Yeah.
still being around
Yeah.
soldiers, but like now it's like literally the next day you're home.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering in your situation as well, because your time there just kind of came to an end, correct? Because you were wounded.
Yeah, I was straight, litter to Germany within a day, and then back home took like a week. But
I know Kevin Vance, another guy that we both love and have ultimate respect for. He talked about, why one of the reasons he ultimately, got out was he was like, look, man, I would come home and I'd have to turn the monster off.
Yeah,
and then I'd go and I'd have to turn the monster back on. And it was just getting harder and harder to make that. But for you and your psychology, you still had years, you still were there with these guys doing this thing for years. So I imagine your monster, whatever it was for you, was that's where you were at. So do you feel like that, as far as whatever you want to call it, the PTSD, or like the psychological distress and torture that you went through, was that part of it? Do you think that it was like the proximity was taken, like the rug was pulled out from under you in a way? Or do you think you were going to go through that no matter what?
I think I was lucky in the sense that I had always compartmentalized my life, just for reasons of how I grew up, so I'd always compartmentalized things. So it didn't really affect me as much as I saw it affect others.
In ways did that serve you?
I also think, again, I'm being very forthcoming, I also think I just have a little sociopathic, I've watched like every murder documentary there is, and I'm fascinated by watching psychopaths, and just psychopathy is just fascinating to me. And I obviously very much have a conscience. And funny story, I was talking to my therapist years ago, and I was like, I'm worried I might be a sociopath, like, because I have these sociopath tendencies. And she goes, Tyler, if you're worried that you're a sociopath,
You're not.
you're definitely not a sociopath. And I was like, oh, can't argue with that one. Yeah. I'm like, how did I miss that one? But I definitely have this little thing where, and I'll give you a story, and there's nothing, I'm going to tell you the story, and it's going to sound crazy, but it's not crazy, and that's why I'm telling it. We did this raid on this house, and anyways, fucking, I don't know, 13 guys were shot. I can't remember. And I had a digital camera, and I had to go take pictures of of all of them, all the guys, and run it through the intel system, blah, blah, blah. And I went to this one guy. He was in the kitchen, and he was shot, I don't know how many times, but at least 8. Not that I'm fucking counting holes, but he wasn't dead. And his head was, down, and I got down there to take the picture. And when I got down there, I realized he wasn't dead. And I just kind of watched him. And then I was like, oh shit, I think he's going to die. I think he's going to die right now. And I just sat there, and I just watched him. And I literally did it. It was an experiment. Like a human experiment. It had nothing to do with the military. I was just like, I want to see what does it do anything? And no, I didn't, just nothing. It didn't mean anything to me. And what I realized is that in my head, again, the little sociopathic quality is, once I put you in you're a piece of shit category, I don't care if your whole house and family burned down. that's just the way I am. Up until